Hello, on behalf of Systemic Leadership Connection Center, I am Jason Meek in the San Francisco Bay Area, and today I'll be in conversation with our colleague Iveta Apine from Riga, Latvia, who is joining us today for a discussion around organizational culture and the systemic field. In preparation really for her upcoming workshop with us that begins on March 20th, 2024, and will run through July 3rd. Hello, Iveta. It's good to be here with you and to have a conversation about this fascinating topic.
Hello, nice to see you and talk to you.
Well, I was hoping maybe we could give a little introduction to your work to the participants who are listening to our presentation today, to our discussion. Maybe you could share a little bit about your background with organizations and specifically your work in the systemic field as it relates to organizations.
Yes, I started working systemically as a systemic coach, and I worked with teams and I worked with leaders. And at some point, I realized that the systemic perspective is taking more and more of me, basically. And also, it became clear that in a certain point, we need to make a distinction. Do we look at more at individuals? Do we look more at teams as units, or we look at the organization as a whole?
Yeah.
So this started 12 years ago for me, and then I, of course, became professionally trained in organizational constellations and also systemic approach in general. And I also work with families. And yeah, so somehow slowly this systemic attitude, systemic perception, systemic interventions, systemic thinking in general has shifted my world. And, like several years ago, it became also very clear to me that we can also look at the organizational culture from systemic perspective on a completely different level, really. And what I like to call it now, and as it seems to me now, that the organizational culture is the topic where we can meet a systemic field in the organization right away.
Yes. And I really resonate with what you say about working with the wholeness in the organization. And my background is as a corporate lawyer, and so my job was to counsel companies, recognizing that they have lots of parts, they have lots of interests, competing interests within them. And so maybe I'm working with a particular manager or with a board of directors, but we're looking at the interests of the employees, the company, the stockholders, all these parts in the context of the whole. Like we're needing to move the whole through the progressive cycle of growth in the company. And so, and I found often that the people, there's I should say, people are very fragmented within organizations usually. This is my role, this is my function, and there isn't often somebody holding the whole. And so it really does offer a distinctive role for consultants or coaches who are approaching organizations. Yeah.
Yes, and to continue with what you just said about the fragmentation, this is true. I also see it very often. And when we come to things like, for example, what are the goals of the organization and what are the strategies, then there's always a question: who is deciding about them, how the decisions are being taken, how they are executed, from which angle, who is seeing what, and who is being led by what. So all of that is meaningful information, and I think organizational training is a good way to explore it, really.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And the other context for my work had been also around mediation and being able to work with organizational conflict and noticing, we're dealing with, say, fragments, two parts, two units, two teams, two people in an organization where there may be some conflict. But in doing that, we can begin to discover patterns underlying conflict in the organization. And so some of my job would be to say, goodness, I'm noticing that there's these patterns coming up around the ways that things are communicated, the power structures in an organization, historical grievances or difficulties moving forward from those things. And so then you become a bit of a service for the whole and being able to outline where things are stuck. It's not just stuck between the two parties, it's stuck in a larger context. And so being able to work and facilitate those changes, it's sort of in working systemically, we have kind of a X-ray vision into what's happening in the organization, and then we can begin to work to address that by bringing clarity, bringing light to some of those patterns.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yes. So I think this is exactly the trick, how to obtain this X-ray vision in a way.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think there is a massive knowledge underneath what we really need to learn. Some people take it intuitively, but even with intuitive thinking, I mean, we can, like in these old jokes, you can get so wrong with completely relying on your intuition.
Mm.
So the question is also, what is the source of intuition anyway?
Yes.
But if we really learn to perceive systemically, and if we learn the basic concepts, then we can kind of operate in organizations much more soundly. And, sometimes I'm thinking, what are the main building blocks of this knowledge that people really evaluate? What really makes what makes sense to them, and I think that it consists of the understanding of how systemic patterns are born.
Mm.
And I often see that people mistake like relationship patterns with system level patterns. So
something you could expand a little bit about that for us.
yes, so I'm just thinking that this is really important to understand, that we are learning with systemic work to really perceive a system level pattern. And what is interesting with this is that since we are part of the system, we are never fully aware how we are entangled in the pattern. It is not possible by nature, because a part cannot see the whole unless, of course, we grow.
Mhm.
So I would say that systemic trainings, all of them, are largely about really enlarging our vision of what is happening,
Yes.
and how we are in the system, how tightly we are part of it. And so learning how to spot a pattern and untangle it is really a major skill. And also, one more thing that we need to understand, and what this training also would give some basics in, is that there is also a system phenomenological theory behind the patterns. I mean, these are huge mechanisms that are unconscious to us. And we are learning to explore them very practically.
Yes.
It means we are not discussing them. It means we are not, just talking about them. We are not sharing ideas. We are physically experiencing them. And we are driving our conclusions from what we hear and now experience in the training. And I think this is really a beauty of these type of trainings. They are very experiential. I mean, we all have gone to schools and learned a lot of things, but what truly stays with us is what we experience from within. So this very practical aspect, and in combination that we kind of apply it to organizational setting, not to families this time, not to personal only, but we really look at organizations with this type of approach. And I think this is quite unique, to be honest.
Mhm. Well, maybe I think that's when you talk about the distinction, say, between the relationship patterns and the systemic patterns, to me that's really interesting because I find that when there is a systemic pattern that comes forward, it can often come out in a power struggle or a conflict or some other type of dynamic. And often the management team or human resources might say, it's just a relationship conflict between them.
Yes, of course, of
And they
course.
don't really relate to the idea that those two people have become polarized. They've become fractals. They're pieces of this bigger whole that are taking on this systemic dynamic. And so, as we work on that particular conflict, we're actually working at the systems level if we're
Yes,
able to see that,
immediately.
perceive it. And so, I think sometimes managers maybe think, it's just a relationship issue, and maybe they don't value so much the skill that's being brought forward or the learning that's coming out about the organization. And they can often feel themselves like it's a lot easier to think the problem is those two people instead of thinking that those people are playing a role or acting out something that is larger in the organization that may need to be tended. So I wonder maybe if you could talk a little bit about,
Yeah.
shifting the mindset between relationship and systemic pattern and really
Yes.
begin that perception.
Yeah, I'm just to continue one more little thing with what you said. I think it's really um, again a skill to look at the behavior as a consequence, human behavior as a consequence, just a consequence.
Yes.
So when we kind of learn to look at it this way, it becomes much more relaxing to explore what is actually underneath.
Yes.
What is actually underneath, and yeah, and also what organizations suffer from. Of course, they suffer from lack of possibilities to change the mindset and the behavior.
Yes.
That's clear. I mean, this is the most expensive thing. And drawing back to my coaching experience, I think coaching is a really expensive mm, type of consulting. And of course, coaches are hired in order to help, for example, the executives to change the mindset, to change the leadership style, to change the behavior, also like really bad behavior. And I mean, it's never easy until we realize that, hey, there's a larger scope beneath this.
Yes.
And also regarding organizational culture, for example, when these issues are in the air, I mean, when organizations talk about culture, for example, when they realize that with the existing culture, they cannot reach what they want. And
Yes.
again, it's a different amount. Yeah, it's not one person, it's whatever, many people. But the issue is still the same. We are still struggling with the same thing. We cannot change at the level what we are looking at. So we need to
Yes.
really zoom out. We need to broaden what we are looking at, actually. And the problem is that we need to look at what we usually do not look at. I mean, how can you look at something you don't know where to look at even? And I think this is really a pitfall for very many organizations and also individuals, that we need to make the shifts and the transformational movements, and they require looking at different things, and they require totally different approach in thinking and later in action.
Yes.
So first, of course, goes the perception, then goes the thinking, and then goes the behavior. I mean, action is the last.
Yes. When I really like, I'm struck by what you say, really, Iveta, in the sense that like these patterns become somewhat rigid. They don't have the imagination left in them anymore. It's like there's a certain role playing, a certain functionality that can be dry and keep the organization static. And what you're saying is that the systemic lens, first we perceive it, then we can think about it, reflect on it, take strategic action. When we embark on that and help to move the organization through its culture to what it is really, what its potential really is, we're really opening up a space for imagination. We're moving it out of the rigidity of the complex, if you will, or the whatever's kind of holding it tight in some kind of locked system. And we're helping to open that and bring the organization back to a place where it can really imagine what its future can look like and how it can grow and how that will impact everything, including the financials, the quantitative features of the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it is also for organizations tricky because in organizations we are used to think rationally, and we are used to thinking in measurable quantitative units. And looking at something, we don't know what to even look at some system level, whatever it means. How can you comprehend?
Yes.
So of course this is a challenge for organizations, and I also notice that in general organizations look for systemic approach when they have tried everything else before.
Mm.
If they have really struggled all the way through, and if they have tried changing people, changing values, changing really functionalities, and it still doesn't work, then we kind of, and systemically, this is, by the way, a very important aspect. It's kind of, you a little bit start to give up. But when you kind of start to give up, there is also another movement close. It's surrendering, but
Yes.
qualitatively, it's a different movement. So
I,
surrendering is including much more. Giving up is saying, hey, I'm tired of myself, basically.
well, and
I
you
don't know what to do. I'm tired of myself.
well, and it is that sense of like, I think that's one of the core issues in coming into the phenomenological perspective, because in a way it's like maybe older than our rational thought, like to really just be with the the experience in a very like allowing the organization to be there, or sorry, allowing the phenomenon to just exist without trying to define it or collapse it into something, to just say, I'm just going to stay with this and allow it to be. So I like how you're framing it in a sense. When we come with the rational analytical mindset, we're missing this whole other layer. And so we
Yes.
maybe exhausted at some point to say, I've tried all the things that the textbooks taught me in business school, or I've tried all the things that I read about or hear about, and I'm still not finding that impact in the organization. And so then out of that place of frustration or maybe impotence,
Yes.
even to say, I don't have the power to do this, you begin to realize there's something larger at work than just the will that I have. And maybe I need to relax a little bit more, surrender into the phenomenon as they are, and begin to just bring more of a perception. It opens up the possibility for that perception that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, and also like, for example, when we look at organizational strategic sessions, where a lot is led by let's say spreadsheets. A lot is led by measured results and goals and so on, and of course with the systemic knowledge we can perceive these movements on strategical level on completely different I don't know, in completely different scope, yeah? And what is interesting, people who study systemically, first, of course, they are thrilled by the tool of systemic constellations. That's clear. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yes.
It is always fascinating. It's shocking. But after some time, when we more and more get used to this, and when we learn how things are interconnected and how the systemic laws work really in nature, something else happens. We don't need the constellation to work systemically. And this is what I really love. And this is what I say, why each leader needs to learn systemic way of thinking, because in general, you can sit in the strategic management meeting and you can really, with applying systemic perspective, you can kind of constellate in your mind's eye and you can see where the movement is going. Is it going towards the wholeness? Is it going towards the flourishing? Or is it going towards, I don't know, some kind of next conflict, you know? So you don't even need to do much if you possess the knowledge. But in order to possess it, this really is something to learn, and you need to apply yourself to this. So you need to dare, and this is the scary part. I mean, getting out of our head is really scary. So we need to be brave enough to surrender to this whatever we call a field, yeah, or we need to be able to surrender to what is really happening on a system level, not in our structures, you know, analytical. And this takes guts, really.
Yes. And you're speaking to that in a way that, you know, it just your expertise in having worked with organizations, your depth of understanding with them, and your guts to work with them in that way. It's sort of, it really shows through. Like often I find in training contexts, people are eager to get to the constellation and wanting to see how that plays out. And it is so interesting and fascinating as a psychodynamic brought forward in that way. And yet I think what you're describing is an even deeper layer in the sense of, you know, once you have this kind of perspective, it's really orienting all the ways that you're viewing. It's like the way that you see things completely changes. And as that matures, then it allows you the skill where, you know, you don't need to step into a constellation necessarily. Maybe that's not the tool. It's really the systemic lens that you are bringing uniquely to this particular problem or organization in its moment in time that is making the difference. And so you're really speaking to sort of the practitioner development at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. My experience working systemically really is many groups training organizational people, and most of them come from very different positions in organizations. And to be honest, this is what I learned from them. They come back after training and they say, you know what? I realized that I don't need this constellation, for example, anymore. I don't have a request to look at a specific issue. Something else is starting to happen to me. And they describe really very practical management, leadership, executive situations, you know, decision-making process where they apply it. And this really makes me happy, you know, because in general, constellation as a method, it's brilliant, but it's also very, in a way, narrow. It has so many prerequisites. And it needs so much to make it work in an ordinary, materialistic, simple world, you know. But somehow with understanding the concepts of patterns, the concepts of consciousnesses, the concepts of symptoms, and learning to play with them, we can do fantastic work within the organization and also outside the organization, being in the consultancy position towards organizations.
Yes, that's very powerful because you know, you're speaking to the way in which we can engage as coaches, as consultants, but also where we can serve a bit as educator in the context that we're working with an organization. We're able to help, as you said, with some, you know, just even raising things forward. Like we don't all necessarily see a vision maybe to train others and organizations for this systemic lens capacity, but just when they're beginning to witness it, it whets the appetite, it brings a curiosity,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
open something in the organization to say, hey, there's more here than just what I can will into effect. And then that really brings a different kind of community forward, or a different way of the stakeholders to relate to each other, and that to me also is part of this quantum leap in the organization, by bringing more humility forward, bringing a little more of that quality of surrender to it. It changes something in the way that people relate to their role and the prospects.
Yeah, and I think this is the aspect of personal transformation that happens during the process of learning about organizations.
Yes. Well, I'm really excited to be able to participate in your course and to go through the training and help crystallize really my systemic lens in terms of, and gain the wisdom of your experience and how you've learned it in the context of the interventions that you've made. I think we're just trying to touch on a couple of themes here, but already it helps me to see how we're moving. We're respecting the analytical and the strategic, and we're somewhat moving beyond that into the phenomenology of an organization, what brings it together, where its potential lies. We're helping move away from more calcified patterns into a more imaginal sense about what's really the potential, what's unlocked or yet to be unlocked in this organization. And in doing so, we're bringing different tools. We're bringing the constellation method as only one, but we're looking to enhance our perception so that we can bring this not only as sometimes interveners, but also as educators to help people in organizations have deeper respect for how these patterns are organizing them and organizing the prospect. And in doing so, we're creating really a community, a different way of thinking, a different way of relating that can really enhance the organization in dramatic ways that are, part of that organizational culture. I guess, we're changing a bit the way that people relate to each other by virtue of having this systemic X-ray vision, this intelligence. And in doing so, there's an impact on the culture that's you don't know where that goes. It opens up immense possibilities. So well, thank you so much for being in conversation with us today to sort of bring your curiosity forward so that we can also learn a little bit more about how the course will unfold and what might be available for us as participants. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of the course, or any last words in this context?
Yeah. Well, I think we had some nice conversation just to open up a little bit the space, how it could feel like.
Yes.
The description of the training is available, and the topics are here. And I think group also adds a lot. And I'm the type of trainer who is really playing with the group a lot. I love it because I mean the knowledge doesn't make sense if it doesn't go through through the processes, through people, through group process. And I really love working with groups. I mean people gain so much from each other within this setting, so
Yes.
that's also part of this.
And that really speaks to me about your skill as a facilitator, as an educator. You've had a wide range of experiences where you can meet people exactly where they are, and you follow the flow, you follow the energy, and it allows for something very lively to come forward, and something
Yes.
that's much needed by those people at that time. Like, you have your ideas, your structure, you have something you want to convey, but you have that flexibility to do it in the context of what's actually needed in the moment,
Yes,
whether it's
yes.
by
I
participants.
really try to take
Yeah,
it into account a lot.
yeah.
Mm.
I love that. That's really a sign of excellent uh,
Thank you.
educator, someone I want to learn from. And I'm just really grateful that you're offering this course together with us, with the Systemic Leadership Connection Center. To learn more about Iveta's course, you can read about it in our events page at systemic-leadership.global. And you can also feel free to contact me. My contact information is there with any questions for English speakers. And we look forward to having participants join us for this seminal course. And thank you, Iveta, for
Thank you
sharing
so much.
tips and being willing to offer this into our community.
And thank you for the interview, and thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.